I am Laura Bucheri, the Director of Publicity at Copper Canyon Press, and you are watching our new interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the homes and minds of our beloved poets. I've always had the dream of seeing, more poets represented on screen, talking shop, answering questions, and kind of taking us behind the scenes of how they do what they do. So in this episode, we are speaking with Monica Sook. Monica, thank you so much for being here. How is your morning going?
My morning is going pretty well. It's rainy and I'm having some green tea, so I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Okay, I'm all right. It's not rainy, but it's pretty cold,
Is it
hence
gloomy?
my
Is it?
outdoor jacket
Uh-huh.
inside.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I would
Mhm.
love to, before we kind of dive in, I'd love to have you introduce yourself if
Sure.
possible. Maybe name, pronouns, where you live, most
Yeah.
recent book you've published.
Hi. So my name is Monica Sook, and I go by she, her. Um, I live in Oakland, California, which is Ohlone land. And my most recent book is A Nail the Evening Hangs On, which I'm really excited about. And it's my first book. So grateful. Thank you. Thank you,
Ah,
Copper Canyon.
it's such a beautiful book too, physically and obviously writingly. I don't think that's a word, but I made it up. Um, but really, I was so excited to work on that book with you. Um, I would love to just kind of dive in, if possible. I kind of wanted to go back almost to the beginning or to a beginning, and kind of ask how you started, why you started writing poetry, or why you were drawn to poetry even. Was it you felt kind of represented in the language? Were you excited by it? Was it just by chance that you kind of happened upon it and started writing it? I'd love to kind of know that story, that moment.
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and then I always feel like I really don't know how to talk about my origin story as a poet. Um, I I believe um, that I really just love language, and I think that I started like rhyming with a friend one day as we were walking home from campus. I was like 19 when I first realized that poetry was something that I could access, something that I could do um, for myself, and that it had opened a whole door to different literary communities, but also it helps me connect with people in my community because I grew up very like isolated in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and as a Khmer girl who was born to refugees in that kind of landscape, I was really looking for myself in certain narratives and media, and I didn't see myself anywhere. So um, I think that language has always felt like an empowering tool for me. Um, and most recently, I've been trying to learn Khmer, you know? So I've always been in search of like my people, my language, my culture. And when I stumbled upon poetry, um, I realized that I could engage. I could engage with my history that way. I also felt that I could see myself in the work of June Jordan. So this all was happening in Washington, D.C., where I was starting to find myself as a poet. So that's where it began. Um, that's kind of just a little cursory review of how it began. But I do think that why I'm drawn to poetry is a question that I'll have until I actually can find like language for that. It's for me, it's liberating, um, and it's something that helps me like learn the kinds of histories that were kept from us in the American education system. It's a subversive practice. It's um, it's a study of freedom for me, which I'm recalling my conversation with the poet Nabila Lovelace, who talked to me about poetry as a study of freedom. So I'm grateful for those words from her. But I think that I'm constantly evolving as a poet. So to kind of go back to my origin story as a poet, it's like it just feels like forever ago, you know? And then again, not so long ago.
I I I get that. I mean, thinking back to like, I don't know, even high school, like how poetry was taught, even middle school, how poetry was first taught, I think, as kind of rhyme in middle school, and then how in high school it was maybe taught as like about nature almost. And then I think it, for me at least, and then I don't think it was until college um, that I kind of understood that language could do what it did in poetry, because we were reading a lot of contemporary poetry, and I was just like, wow, like that's allowed, or like that's possible. So I do relate to that a bit. Did you start reading poetry around the same time that you started writing poetry?
Yes, like I had been exposed to some poems, like Shel Silverstein, you know,
Yeah.
like just as a kid, I would read what is that? The Sidewalk book. I
Hmm.
forget what it's called now. Um,
Isn't that, I feel like that's what it's called,
is it called Sidewalk?
like the sidewalk.
No, it
We're
has
gonna have to fact check this.
you can fact check it.
Yeah.
But I can't remember what it was. And maybe like in this strange pandemic, I'm like, I feel like I'm not remembering a lot of things. I think I'm kind of being forgetful, but maybe maybe I've always been forgetful. But sometimes I just don't have space in my head to like remember everything, you know? So anyways, but Shel Silverstein is a was something that I like grew up reading, and that was really fun. That was in my like that was it in my home library. Um, but I grew up reading, going to the library, and I used to struggle with reading, which is like apparent in my ABC for Refugees poem. So no, I wasn't really exposed to poetry, like contemporary American poetry, until I actually like came upon um, a class at American University where I studied with David Keplinger, and so I was actually like I remember reading Elizabeth Bishop. I remember reading like Joe Bolton. There were poets that I was trying to emulate, like Robert Frost, and then I was like, I don't know. I just don't know if this is if I can write something like,
Yeah.
you know, a snowy wood. And so
Or if you want to.
or if I wanted to, yeah. And it's not that my teacher was imposing anything on me. He was very encouraging of me writing my narrative, but I don't think I really explored like the Cambodian narrative. And I remember seeing like a line about Cambodia in one of June Jordan's poems, and I can't remember which one. But I remember seeing that. I was like, oh, this poet is aware of my history, you know, and I feel reflected in that. And I saw how expansive her poems were, and how unapologetic she was, and how she was in and of her people in her language. And so I felt that poetry was not so different than just like talking to a friend, which there are like poems that she has like for her friends, or poems that she writes that are like answering machine poems. You know, she has a poem for En Tazake Shange. Poem for she has a poem that's addressed to like Eminem, and I think she's so playful, you know. And I just really enjoyed seeing the way that she moved as a poet. And so when I discovered her writing at a Split This Rock event, I think it was her second annual festival. I remember seeing Sonia Sanchez there, and I was like, "Wow, this is incredible!" And I didn't really know Sonia Sanchez's work, and I'm still like learning and discovering her work.
Sure.
But yeah, I think I did not read poetry, and until like I think Directed by Desire by Jim
Mhm.
Jordan was probably the first like fat collected poetry book that I wanted to read. So I picked that up a long time ago in the library, at my campus, and I was very excited. I was very excited by her work, and I don't think that I really knew like the poetry scene, so to speak, until I had to work at the reading series at NYU. And that was also part of my education, was actually like reading or listening to poets and seeing how they carry themselves, and getting to know the literary world, which I had not really known ever in that way, in such an intimate way. So um, that's the long answer to your question about
No, I
whether
love
I
that
was
answer.
reading poetry when I started writing. I was like, kind of June Jordan.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then like I'm
No,
discovering like who's Terrence Hayes,
yeah.
who's Fahimba Jess, like who are all these other people who are doing such incredible work too. Like yeah, who is Kimiko Han and Brenda Shaughnessy? And luckily I had those two as my teachers. So yeah, I'm
Two amazing
grateful. I'm
poets.
grateful for what I've been able to learn and absorb just by being in New York City among other poets.
I feel, yeah, I feel like I love what you said about kind of how reading poetry and kind of experiencing it in a very solitary way is kind of one aspect of it, right? But then there's that whole other aspect of like the poetry community, like physically. I mean, well, not now necessarily, but in a room, hearing a poet read, understanding what they're about, who they are, and kind of what they what they want to kind of show to the world. I think through their art, but also through them as a person, is like also a separate part of the community that I think is almost what first drew me to poetry period. Almost like I felt like the language, yes, but then I started learning about poets themselves, and like got started going to readings and started kind of feeling super seen in the community, and that just made me want to read more and learn more. And so I do really think that that's a big part of poetry
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah, I
um
miss readings. I miss going to events and seeing
Me
people.
too.
I think I took it for granted, but now I'm
Oh, I'm sure we all do.
yeah, like I miss being in a room full of people who are just they're packing the whole room because they want to hear a poet read. Like that is a that is quite like a sensation that you get, like just
Yeah.
among people, and like squeezing between certain seats just to get like to the empty seat in the middle of the row. Yeah, I miss that. I miss the way that we would intersect at these readings.
And that energy. I
Hmm.
mean, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a lot. I'm curious, you bring up June Jordan, who to me writes politically, is maybe a politically engaged poet. And I'm curious, like, your work is a lot about memory, a lot about kind of Cambodian heritage and kind of inherited trauma, a lot of that. Do you consider, one, do you consider your work political, I guess? And two, do you, I'm curious on kind of how you feel about
Mm.
well, no, let's start with part one, and then I don't want to overwhelm. Do you consider your work political? I'm curious because, like,
Uh-huh.
when we think of like political poetry, I feel like a lot of people think of like really, really like urgent, like a kind of like talking to the moment kind of
Mhm.
work. But I feel like
Mhm.
I consider your work somewhat
Mhm.
political, even
Yeah,
though it's housed in memory and ancestry and things like that. So
yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
kind of curious about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I believe my work is political. And you know, I'm trying to find ways to talk about my work so that it's not just rooted in history. Because when we say history, we just think, oh, this happened in the past. Things are always happening at the same time. Like history's happening
Or repeating
right
themselves.
now. Yeah, like the effects of like the genocide in Cambodia, it lives inside me. And yeah, so I do think that my work is political um, in the sense that I'm naming what happened, but I'm also actively trying to heal it, and not give so much power to um, my oppressors, and like trying to center tenderness and desire, I think is political, especially when perhaps you are writing a narrative um, in which people often expect like trauma porn, or they even just ask for the trauma porn. Um, like I think writing about having written a book about intergenerational trauma, and then still being aware of like this very white Western gaze on my narrative is just something that I've had to navigate my whole life, and yes, in my poetry too. Um, but yeah, I just think that my my journey as a poet is also about trying to bring a fuller picture as to what it means to be human, like even outside of the identity of being Khmer. Um, I think it's a struggle though, it's a struggle. It's something that I'm thinking through right now. Like, um, I am taking like Khmer classes um, with a linguistics PhD student at Cornell, and I'm really grateful that I can learn from him, um, and be grounded in that work. And I think that learning the Khmer language, learning this ancient language, which nobody uses, which has no real commercial purpose in the U.S. Like no one's asking to speak Khmer with you, and no one necessarily. I don't feel like this country values Cambodian lives or Cambodian history, or the language, and then the only thing they do know is like, oh yeah, Angkor Wat, I've been there, I've traveled there, and then the whole genocide, like they'll know about that. But hopefully my goal is to like, yes, like reclaim some of these things, but also um can I write about this morning, when I walked outside and felt a little rain? Can I write about my loneliness without it being something that white people will gaze on? And I don't know. I feel like this is a conversation I have with myself all the time. So I don't know. Now I feel like my answer is like long, and I'm not sure
No,
what exactly I'm saying. But I think my poetry is political in the sense that I I understand my history, and I understand like the present day, and I understand that families were kept apart during the Khmer Rouge regime, and that to even hide to be together, or to even just walk across the field to like find each other, like love is political, that tenderness is political. And I think that writing a poem is political. Like
I do too.
when I think about that time, like you're not supposed to write poems. The artists were executed. Um, and so I know that like what I'm doing can also be called dangerous. So
No, yeah.
so I think it's political to even exist.
Yeah.
And
And
that's why I struggle to answer that question sometimes, that
yeah.
is the poetry political? Um, yeah, it
Well,
is.
there's no one way to be
No.
political. And I think that that's, yeah, I think that that's,
Mhm.
I don't know, always interesting. I like what you said about naming.
Yeah.
Um, that that really resonates with me. And I think the power in naming, and the power in kind of having control of that, of the naming, I
Mhm.
think is really big. And I'm kind of curious because you said you were translating from Khmer or
Well,
learning Khmer,
I'm learning
and
Khmer because I would love to translate one
you
day.
want to translate. I'm curious, like how, one, just how has that process been of learning that language, and two, in terms of naming, I'm curious, like naming in Khmer versus naming in English. Like how, I mean, maybe you haven't gotten to that stage of work yet, but I feel as though that would be inherently different and mean something almost different to you.
Yeah, I think that it's a way for me to decolonize. I really do hear Soma Sharif when she says that English was the first defeat. Um, and so this is something like learning Khmer is also helping me with my grief during this time. And this grief was something that I'm gonna have to live with for a while. But I can show you the consonants. This is a really
Oh,
messy version.
wow.
I spilled something here, and there was like, and some of the characters are like cut off, and some of them are wrong actually. So let me show you another version. But that's an alphabet sheet that I got, or a consonant sheet that I got from my teacher in um, from the Cambodian school of San Francisco, because I used to take classes at the temple and on Sundays in San Francisco, but it was just really it was something that I couldn't keep up with while I was at Stanford. And these are the vowels. Um, so yeah, I find myself like really just enjoying learning my language, my ancestral language, like
Yeah.
holding me down in a way while I'm experiencing grief and isolation. And I do feel like perhaps I'm also dealing with trauma, like this collective trauma that we're all dealing with.
Of course.
But it's all compounded, you know? And yeah, I'm aware of myself, and I'm aware that learning Khmer is bringing me a lot of joy. But I do think it's a way for me to decolonize. And I do think that, so like going back to your question about, um, what did you say again? You said, is like
Like naming.
Khmer, or naming something in Khmer is different? Okay, yeah. So yes, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And that's something that I'm learning right now.
Sure.
I'm learning that, like, so to translate, so in Khmer, the word to translate is batrai, and bat is like fold, fold and flip, batrai. So to flip and fold language.
Oh, wow.
To like something is the word for that is jojet. And I think that I believe this is correct. I learned that jet is like a way to say heart. It's like an old way to say the word heart, or perhaps like a poetic way. I'll have to like look in my notes again. But Joel is like to go in. So to like something is to go inside the heart. And so it's poetic for me. And I feel like since the book came out in February 2020, and then like the shelter in place order happened, and we've had several months of this pandemic of just staying at home and trying our best to get through. Um, I've met a lot of grief during this time, and so um, I think that this is grounding me. This learning
Sure.
Khmer is grounding me. Um, and it's something that like I don't know if I've been able to fully celebrate my debut, um, because I've had to experience so much loss. Not just like the loss of a book tour, but the loss of actual people in my life who inspired my writing. And I just want to say that Khmer is a way for me to reconnect with poetry um, outside of the English language. I'm really grateful for that. And I'm just beginning this journey, so I don't really know how to speak about it fully. Um, but it means a lot to me to be able to learn this. And if I can come out of this pandemic knowing more Khmer and being able to read and write, which I have been able to do, like just on my second day of learning Khmer, like learning certain sight words,
Wow.
learning the first two lines of the consonants, and some of the vowels. And I'm gonna have to learn all the special rules eventually, you know, like
Sure,
it's
sure.
it's really exciting to be able to feel affirmed in a way that I've never felt affirmed before. And it comes at a good time. It comes at a really
Oh,
good time when I could just
Monica.
fall into like despair, you know. Um, but I'm here and I am moving through this and I'm trying to be as
Yes.
gentle as possible. And
Yes.
I'm excited to see how learning Khmer will impact the way I experience English. Because
Oh,
I've
I'm
always
sure.
known like,
Yeah.
that's the first language I was exposed to. So I've always known that me learning Khmer or me just being Khmer and having like a certain Khmer mentality also affects the way I speak English. So
Oh, of
we'll see.
course. Of course.
We'll see
I'm
what I
excited. I'm
learn.
excited for this
Yeah,
journey. I really, really, really am.
thank you.
Um, I wonder, could you maybe read us a poem of yours?
Absolutely.
I would love to maybe have you read a poem and then maybe give a shout out to a book that you've been loving or an author you've been loving lately.
Sure, I'd love to do that. So I'll read a poem from A Nail the Evening Hangs On. It's called Song of an Orphan Soldier Clearing Landmines. When I saw my father walking, I kicked the road, convinced metal brains at his feet. The humming they heard was a knife cutting, not a living man's voice. They believed me. Like snakes in grass, they clicked their tongues. The gods I met promised me they could make a life happen after what had happened if I knew who my father was. I clapped my hands to signal a stream, and my father followed my sound. He drank and bathed as I cleared the landmines, and I hoped it was him. He slept in the jungle, dream jaguars circling, though it was nothing but fire burning. Close to the Basak, I climbed mango trees to feed him. Along the way, I waved my arms, no. To himself, my father said, yes. No, I did not bury the bodies nobody had prayed for. There are things in this world we must make one another see. My father took me gently, each one of us gently. He took us to the flames, humming, my children, my children. 3 provinces I traveled with him like this, only to take him back to Prayeng, where he found his sisters. If my father were to tell this, he would tell you he carried me over his shoulders to a nearby village, that no danger touched him, and that the gods were watching. They wanted to see me live.
Yes. I love that poem. Thank you so much for reading that one.
Thank you, Laura. And a
Um,
shout out
yeah.
I would like to give is to Tongo Eisen Martin. His book Heaven is All Goodbyes is a fantastic book, and he's a really wonderful poet, revolutionary. I love his work, so definitely read Tongo Eisen Martin's Heaven is All Goodbyes. Mhm.
Ooh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's going on my list. Well, thank you so much for being here, Monica. It's been such a joy to speak with you, and I'm really just so grateful that you took the time to be here and share with us. So thank you so much.
Grateful too. Thank you so much.
Of
Bye.
course. See you soon. Bye.